there's 7 F's of Oola, and Oola is all about finding balance and growing in every area of your life. All the 7 key components. So it's balance, and you got to think it's not just balance, like just to where one thing's just not out of whack, one thing's not out of order. It's balance and grow. Everything that's dead is in complete balance, and many things that are growing aren't necessarily in balance. So we actually want to do both. We want to integrate all of the 7 key areas of life. We've talked about fitness, we've talked about finance, we've talked about family. Uh, we've gone through several of the key areas. Talked about our field, which is really your career, or that's what you do full time, where you steward and use your gifts, whether you get paid for it or not. This is area number 5. This one is the area of faith, and this is one that really it can trip people up as much as maybe even more than some of the other ones, because a lot of times, let's face it, if we're not doing good financially, that can create stress. But nobody really supernaturally loads down a spiritual load of guilt or shame or condemnation on you because of it. Fitness, it's a given that some people seem to be more in shape and other people seem to be less out of shape. But the weight of this area, the weight of faith, is so big that so often it can be an area where people are guilted, they're shamed, they're condemned. And so, what we want to do really is just kind of in this one, just kind of set the parameters on all of that. And really, I want to talk to you just kind of about the idea of faith, maybe in the general sense that might give you some faith to explore this area even more. So, that's really the goal of this talk. Now, lots of the weight of the guilt that people carry in the area of faith, it's because of the idea that, well, you might have been told this before, that the reason that healing didn't come for a situation that you needed healing for, or the reason financial breakthrough didn't happen, or the reason a relational issue might not have resolved in the way that you thought it would resolve. A lot of times people feel that, or they're told that, maybe even told from a pulpit, that the reason that didn't resolve was because you didn't have enough faith. In fact, you might have even been blamed for it, that your lack of faith somehow restrained God from moving, as if faith is the most powerful force in the universe that could even hold back the Creator Himself. Well, if maybe that was you and you were told those things, let me maybe put your mind at ease for the next couple of minutes about all of this, because this whole faith thing, it is an area that, well, just to say it simply, when you open up the Bible, you really can't fit a faith equation into a tiny box. You can't even create an equation. Like it's not this much faith plus this size situation equals this outcome. It's really a little bit different than that. It's like, let me give you some examples. So all throughout the New Testament, we see examples where Jesus does move and does incredible miracles when there is total complete faith. And that's where people really start creating the formula, because you see instances where, like the centurion, I believe it's in Matthew chapter 8, walks up to Jesus and says, "Hey, my servant, he's ill, but you just say the word and he'll be made well." And Jesus says, "Wow, I've not seen such great faith in all of Israel." And Jesus does effectively this long distance miracle. He doesn't even have to go with the man. In fact, he's going to go with the man, and the man says, "Oh, you just say the word. You don't even need to come." Or we see the example of the Syrophoenician woman who, her daughter is at the point of death, and she just has this faith and says, "Hey, Jesus, you can heal my daughter." And Jesus says, "Yeah, but I came to the lost sheep of Israel first." And she says, "Yeah, but like just a crumb, just a scrap, just some small thing. This is a small thing for you." And he marvels at her unbelief, or her belief rather, and he heals her daughter. Or you see the woman that has the flow of blood, and she kind of snakes her way through the crowd and says, "If only I can touch the hem of his garment." Total faith, and instantly, like, power goes out of Jesus. He doesn't even say anything. He just feels that the power's gone out because of her faith. And so, based on stories like this, we tend to build up this box. We tend to build up these formulas and say, "Hey, it all fits in like this. If we can get it to fit like that, then something amazing is going to happen." Well, the issue is, if you read the rest of the New Testament, it doesn't quite fit so tidy. For instance, there are times when Jesus heals people that have absolutely no faith. For instance, there's a man at the pool of Bethesda. It's in about John chapter 6, and Jesus walks up to him and says, "Hey, do you want to be made well?" And the man says, "Well, but I'm here at the pool because every time an angel stirs the water, people believed back then that if the water started moving, the first person that was in would be healed." And evidently they were, because there was this crowd of people that gathered around, and John writes that this happened. And the man starts making all these excuses about, well, I can never get in the water because somebody else is. Like, talk about no faith. He's actually making excuses why he has the condition he has. And Jesus says, hey, if you want to be made well, take up your mat, rise up, and walk. And instantly, this man is made well. In fact, it's one of the issues that causes all sorts of commotion with the Pharisees, is because Jesus just heals this guy that has no faith. You see other examples, like in Mark chapter 9, Jesus is coming down the Mount of Transfiguration, coming down the hill. And when he gets to the bottom of the hill, there's a man who has a demon possessed son. And that demon is throwing the son into the fire and tormenting him and having convulsions, probably these epileptic type of seizures. And he's throwing him in the fire, the demon is. And Jesus looks at the disciples and he marvels that they didn't heal the kid. And Jesus looks at the man and he says, well, goodness, let's do something here. And the man says, I believe, help my unbelief. And so there we see this idea of faith mixed with unfaith, like which is probably the situation with a lot of us. So yes, in the Bible you see examples where there's total faith. You see examples where there's no faith. You see examples where there's, well, I kind of believe. Wait, no, I don't. Wait, yes, I do. No, I don't. You kind of like the hokey pokey. I'm in, I'm out. And then also, one more example. You see instances in the Bible where Jesus heals based on someone else's faith. So like in Mark chapter 2, there's this great story where the friends of a paralytic, they're coming to see Jesus. He's teaching in a house and they can't get anywhere near him because there's this crowd. And so what they do is they climb up on the roof with the paralytic, like they're hauling this guy on his mat or hoisting him with ropes or carrying him somehow. And then they start tearing through the roof and they lower him down right there where Jesus is teaching. And the scripture says in Mark chapter 2 that when Jesus saw not his faith, when Jesus saw their faith, he said to the man in front of him, your sins are forgiven. And then he said, rise and walk. Now, notice that. He forgave sin, and healed someone based on someone else's or a group of someone else's faith. Like, this flies completely in the face of all religion, right? Like, how do you even fit all of this stuff in a box? And the issue is, you really can't. So when we come to the idea, the topic of faith, here's the first thing I want to say from all of those examples is the faith is faith in a relational being who loves you, who gave himself for you, who is orchestrating and is orchestrating all things together for your good, is what Romans 8 says. It doesn't mean that all things are good. It means that he works all things together for the good. It is not faith in faith. It is faith in that creator, in that redeemer, in that sustainer. It is faith that he is for you and that he is working all of those things. Here's the second thing I would say about faith is the faith isn't even, this sounds really weird, but you'll have to go look it up. It's not even your faith. It's actually his faith. So there's this great verse in the New Testament. It's in Galatians 2:20. A lot of you guys probably know it. You could probably even just recite it off the top of your head. I've been crucified with Christ, and the life I now live. Okay? And Paul says, so I'm crucified, so I no longer live. Christ lives in me. And the life I now live, I live by faith. So by faith. Some translations say faith in the Son of God. That's not actually the best translation. If you look up in the Greek language, where kind of the New Testament was originally penned in Greek and Aramaic, and the King James Version actually gets this one really accurate. So reading the King James Version is a lot like probably just chewing up sandpaper because the language is a little bit different than how we speak. It's a little bit more like Shakespeare, a little bit more formal. But that verse says, the life I now live, I live by the faith of the Son of God. Not my faith, but the faith of Christ in me. Like, I've been crucified, I've died, the life I now live, it's not I who live, it's Christ who lives in me. And even the faith that's inside of me isn't just my faith to manufacture it. Like, it's a gift in and of itself. Like the faith, it's even his faith, and he somehow has planted it inside of me. This is why in other verses, Paul would say, like in Romans chapter 10, faith comes by hearing. Not faith is reached or you strive for. Like faith, it's actually something that's a gift that settles upon, it comes to you, and it's just there. Like even that faith is is a gift. Like that faith is something that's just almost just handed your way. And then it becomes, we have all these metaphors, it becomes this hope, it becomes this preferred outlook, it becomes this perspective, it becomes, you just kind of insert all of the synonyms that somehow you just have this sense, this feeling that, all right, someone, something bigger, creator, sustainer, redeemer is with me, is for me, and I can move forward in trust of that reality. I can move forward like somehow hoping on that. Let me tell you one thing that will give rise to faith, one thing that will help you and sustain you in that. And this is one that kind of nudges into when we get to the topic of friends in a couple more weeks here. Revelation 12 says they overcame the dragon, they overcame the evil, and they overcame Satan by the blood of Jesus. So, what Jesus has done in the past, and by the word of their story, by the word of their testimony. They overcame by two things. And notice that the blood, what Jesus has accomplished. Okay, what has he accomplished? Redemption, salvation, sanctification, and by the word of their story. Here's what people in the ancient world believed, and I think this is so true even now, is they believed that when a story was told of somehow God moving on behalf of another person, that when that story was told, that story itself, the telling of the story, the retelling of the story, the recounting of the deliverance, of the redemption, it actually carried the same power that was present in the original event that the story is being told about. So, for instance, this is why every year at Passover, which is we celebrate that at our Easter celebration, this is why every year at Passover, Jews would tell the story of God's redemption of them from Exodus, how he went to Pharaoh and with an outstretched arm, let my people go. Pharaoh sent them out, and then Pharaoh changed his mind and chased them, and the Red Sea blew open, and they walked through on dry land, and then it closed in, and he wiped out the destiny of of an entire nation there so that they could become free to live their destiny. They would retell that story because they believed that when they retold the story, that same power of all those miraculous events was then present in that moment. And so they would tell the stories over and over and over. You might have sensed the same thing. You're in a church service, or you're talking with friends one night, or you're out at dinner, or you're listening to a podcast, you're listening to something, you're streaming something online, a video or something, and you hear the story, or you see a post, an image, a picture of something that God has done on behalf of someone else. And when you hear that story, when you see that story, somehow it gives rise to you. Like what's happened in that moment is faith has not been something you've striven for. It's not been something you've tried to manufacture. It's something that came to you. Something that in that moment was birthed in you. And so this faith, it's not a formula. The faith is a trust that someone bigger is working on your behalf. In fact, again, to circle back to the verse I've said a couple of times in this video and in other posts on my webpage, in the Facebook group, Romans 8 talks about God working all things together for your good. Not that all things are good, but all things work together for the good. That somehow he can take the worst of, if you're just going to use a baseball analogy, he can take the worst pitch with the worst bat and still swing it and knock out a grand slam. That Ecclesiastes 3:11 says that he makes all things beautiful in their time. Not that all things are beautiful. Some things are outright messy. But the faith is that in this moment I can trust that someone is looking out for me, that even if it doesn't make sense, and even if I've got to cling to the story that he's done something for someone else, that my faith is not a restraint, that there's not a formula where I've got to kick up enough to where like all of a sudden God's free to move because my faith or lack of faith is stronger than him, but that I can trust that he is for me. A couple years ago, and I'll end with this, I was reading a book by Brennan Manning. Brennan Manning is an author that writes a lot about grace. He wrote this book, The Ragamuffin Gospel. He also wrote this book, Abba's Child. Highly recommend both of those books. And in the book Abba's Child, he actually says this. He quotes St. Augustine. St. Augustine's the one that wrote the Confessions. He's one of the church fathers. St. Augustine wrote The City of God. You might have read him from any of your literature classes or even theology classes if you had those. History classes, like he kind of cross-pollinates through all those areas. Real influential figure back in the 300s-ish. St. Augustine said this about Romans 8:28. If that verse is true, all things work together for the good. Brennan Manning just kind of quoting this and referencing him. If all things work together for the good, that means that I can have this trust that all things, that all the things that have been done against me, all the things that are situations and circumstances in which I find myself, in which I have no control. And if you just look on the board of our Facebook post where we talk about each week, Thursdays is generally the day I post, hey, what's a prayer request? And I encourage you to look through those. And you'll see many people are found themselves pulled into a situation over which they had no control, a situation that they never would have chosen to live as a chapter of their life, right? St. Augustine and Brennan Manning said, all things work together for the good. That means that any of those situations, like I can have this trust even if it doesn't make sense, and it's not dependent upon raising my faith level, digging in deeper to get my faith quotient high. I can have this confidence that there's someone else that's working behind the scenes that's not causing this stuff, but somehow can put those pieces in order for my good. And if all things work together for the good, I can have this trust and this confidence, maybe shakable at times, but I can have this confidence, this awareness that means if all things work together for the good, even the mistakes and sins and blunders that I've made, that somehow grace even covers that. Do you see? When we come to the topic of faith, really, that's what we're talking about. And that's why we say faith is necessary for a life that is balanced and growing.